All right, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of Two Docs and a Grunt. I am Doc number one, retired Navy Corpsman Luis Fonseca.
Okay, me now. I'm Andrew Barry, also known as Doc Barry. I'm Doc number two, psychologist and psychoanalyst. I specialize in working with vets and first responders fighting with post-traumatic stress disorder.
And I'm Nate Emery, retired Mustang, 22 years in the Marine Corps. And I guess I'm trying to bring a little bit of balance to the doc side of it. And today we've got with us retired Staff Sergeant Tony Storey. He did 4 years he did active duty from 1989 to 1993, was in a Desert Storm, Operation Restore Hope, during the first wave with the 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines on the 15th MEU. And then did some time in the Marine Corps Reserve and was mobilized twice for some other deployments, which is going to tell us about some of the stuff. And Tony, is there anything else you want to add before first questions?
Retired law enforcement. I was a police officer in different agencies for the state of Ohio for a total of 26 years. So I was kind of dual hatting it, so to speak.
Yeah, so you were you always had that uncertainty for the 27 years doing that too.
Right. I've been retired since March of 21. So this is the first time since the age of 18 I haven't had a weapon in hand or on my person. So it's taken me a year to get used to it. I thought it would be a lot easier than what it is, but it really does. When you spend 2/3 of your life in servitude to others, the public, the nation, it becomes who you are. But it through counseling and bourbon, I've gotten away from most of it.
Yeah, I missed the former, but right now I'm just practicing in the latter. So, I think maybe a good starting point is what kind of got us running our mouths here in the beginning before we started recording is I was telling the other guys here too, and I couldn't exactly remember how Tony found us on, through the podcast, and he mentioned that somebody we had in common, and I don't know if I pointed it out first or you did, or if you've got, do you have other friends in common that have been on the show already?
Molly Heaney is a good friend of mine. I've known her for a while.
Okay.
I know she was on the show, but like you had asked me, you noticed that we both knew a Marine from 3-9, Brian Taylor. I guess he was in weapons platoon with you. He was with me. He actually retired from the Reserves, Master Sergeant. I think I told you that.
Yeah. Oh man, that's I see a lot of names sometimes when I've got a whole bunch of people in common. I'm like, you didn't always know everybody, but you knew of them, and I'm like, okay, I wonder which one of these guys it was, and it was a lot of people from my platoon, so I couldn't quite remember.
That and like when somebody finds out that you're a Marine, they know a Marine, and they'll say, "Hey, do you know Joe Schmuckatelli?" And it's like, dude, there are 198,000 other Marines. You know what I mean? And the smallest branch, but we all look alike. We've all got bad hair. And, it's a bigger corps, but it is a small corps at the same time.
Right.
Usually the first filter, right, is what was your MOS? And if it's the same from there, then the chances are, I knew Bob Smith too.
Right.
Or when you're out with a handful of Marines, like I think I told you about, Nate, St. Patrick's Day when the hapless poser came to a table of 4 grunts in an Irish bar, simplifying us. And when we asked him the MOS, I was black ops. So I don't like to talk about it. And at that point, you get 4 people leaning forward, and it didn't end well for him. He ended up being frog marched by a friend of mine, and after he was open-handed, slapped in front of everybody in this bar.
And he still didn't know to shut up.
He didn't know he wasn't able to go because Rhino had a hold of him. He had his arm, and so he frog marched him around the bar to anybody else who was a Marine or a serviceman, and he made this guy apologize before he let him leave.
Oh man!
Before he escorted him to the door and turned him over to the bouncer to say, get him out of here before he gets killed.
Right.
But yeah, so.
Yeah. It's like, what did you do? Oh, I did something that I want to draw a lot of attention to.
Yeah.
I'll make sure I draw attention to
it. Right.
Yeah. I was a cook, and I got PTSD the day a souffle fell on me, and it hasn't been the same, man. Death from within, yo.
But it's funny that you say that, because at 3-9, if I remember correctly, we had a couple of cooks that had Bronze Stars.
Probably.
from Desert Storm. From Desert Storm, because the log train got hit before we did.
Task Force Papa Bear, unless you were, if you were a Ripper, you were just shooting at anything that moved, which is why you heard, here comes.
Including Papa Bear.
Here comes Ripper getting your holes.
Yeah. And you know who was over at Ripper? One of the company commanders was over there. Mattis.
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Mattis, he was with 1-7, so he was actually commander of Ripper, or with Ripper. Yeah. But I probably saw him in theater. When I saw a picture of him with his glasses on, I was like, he looks familiar. A little bookworm that you would see, and you don't know he's going to be chaos one day. But
the warrior poet,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so you went to boot camp in '89? Did you go like right after high school, like usual?
I enlisted in boot camp. I enlisted in 1988. I actually joined as part of the delayed entry, the DEP or whatever, and and so I graduated high school on like the 7th of June, and I went to boot camp. I got to Parris Island on the 26th of June, so I had a 19-day break, and it's ironic is because June 26th, that's Chesty Puller's birthday, so I got to the Marine Corps the day the real patron saint was born, but I joined in '88, and it was back then, when we're in the '80s, we're coming out of the Reagan era, going into the Bush era, the height of consumerism. And so it wasn't like it is now when you join the military, when people thank you for putting yourself out there, for being that selfless. Back 34 years ago, it was, man, you have no future. You have no other options but the Marine Corps. Dude, I feel sorry for you. Yeah. And then of course it rolls into the whole, no drill instructor is going to get in my face. Some motherfucker talks to me like that, I'm going to put him on his ass. And you're like, yeah, you will. But, when you see these crazed dogs, but I never really, there was never any other option for me. I didn't think of anything else. I wasn't going to go to college.
Yeah.
I was a smart kid, but I didn't have a lot of direction. I didn't have the best home life. So, the Marine Corps, I didn't have any plans beyond that. I figured I'll join the Marines, I'll do my 4 years, and then hell, I don't know. But I needed that direction because, I wasn't going into college. I didn't like school. My daddy wasn't hooking me up with a high paying factory job. He wasn't, I didn't have the connections. I didn't wear my, the high-waisted pleated jeans. I didn't pierce my ear. I didn't have the mullet. Didn't have the IROC Z. I was born to be the slimy, shithead little grunt that I became.
I laugh because that's how I feel. After I retired from being a corpsman for 22 years, I was born to do this. This is the only,
right.
It almost feels like the Marine Corps found you, right?
Come to a realization that you can't change what you really are at your heart. And as much as that dichotomy that was there, as much as I hated it at times, there's the realization is, if I would have went any other MOS than infantry, I wouldn't have lasted. I wouldn't have. I needed that stimulus of being miserable and pissed off all the time and being able to endure it so that I could look down my nose at those of you who weren't grunts, and I could, give the finger across the board to anybody, with that attitude of you know what, fuck you, because you weren't out there suffering with me in that shit.
Yep.
And then it's funny is those same guys that had the high-end cars, the cushy jobs, the hookups, they had the hot girlfriend with the teased hair and the fake tan and the pussy that was like a putting green at Pebble Beach. They got away with that shit, getting one over on me on the Grunt up until September 10th of 2001, because September 11th, we get attacked by, not on 9/11. And then those guys, they're not the ones asking me, in the bar, hey, see, you're back from the Marines. What was it like? How many people did you kill? Who gives a fuck? They're the ones now who go to the 511 store. They buy the tactical trousers. They can buy the Oakley pilot gloves. They can shave their head, grow the Duck Dynasty beard, look like an operator. And, I grow a beard and it looks like pubes. I shave it off. I can't wear my hair long because it frizzes out. I'm still me. I'm still that pissed off little grunt that could, I could take it. I could hack it. And they're still pretending,
Yeah. Before you came in the Marine Corps, your upbringing, did you have you don't need to go into detail. I'm just kind of curious. Did you have is the Marine Corps your first introduction to a lot of adversity, or were things kind of rough when you were a kid too?
Things were rough when I was a kid, and and I'm an open book. There's nothing you can ask me. I'm not gonna. The one thing I pride myself about is my overall sense of integrity and being honest. And yeah, I wasn't in a household that there was a lot of abuse, but there was a lot of abuse through neglect. It wasn't that I was physically abused. I was just ignored. My mother wasn't the best person. She abandoned me when I was 3. One of my earliest memories is waking up one morning and it's just, I'm alone in a house. I don't know where anybody's at until my grandmother showed up and took me out of there. And then, years later, it was either my mom got kidnapped by somebody she was having an affair with, or she ran away with somebody she was cheating on my dad with. I don't know. I just know that that seminal shock of being 3 years old and waking up alone stuck with me. And I never had a good relationship with my mother. I mean, she, like I said, she had her own issues, and she liked to put them on me and my sisters. And my father, I think he did the best he could, but he wasn't in a happy marriage, and he focused himself on working and providing, which meant that he, when I was wanting to play baseball or football, he had to work. And so that was kind of it. So I think I kind of ended up on the PTSD spectrum, whether I wanted to be or not, because of those early childhood issues or traumas, whatever you want to call them. But but the Marine Corps was always kind of an omnipresent factor in my life, just because my father was a Vietnam Marine, my uncle was a Marine, another uncle was a Korean War Marine. I think at the age of 8 or 9, I was probably 8. I saw a movie on Saturday morning one day. It was called Tribes, and it had Jan Michael Vincent and Darren McGavin from Christmas Story, Ralphie's dad.
Yeah.
Darren McGavin was a drill instructor. And so I'm watching this Saturday afternoon matinee movie, and I'm watching these DIs and these recruits, and I knew that's what my dad did. And from that point on, that's what I was going to be. I'm going to be a Marine. And in the back of my mind, I think I wanted some kind of sense of standing with my father, with those men, as far as the examples they set. It was never put in my face, you're going to be a Marine. You're going to, you're going to fight. The only expectation I had from any of my parents was don't become a felon. Don't go to prison. Just make it through school and get out of our house and be a productive member of society. So, the Marine Corps, at least there was some sense of order and function to it, because I was just such a hellion growing up. I mean, I like to say in the small town I grew up in, Canal Winchester, Ohio, that, I grew up in a class of 99 kids in my graduating class, and you had the popular kids and you had the not so popular, the geeks. I was in a class by myself. I was notorious. So I enjoyed notoriety because I run my mouth. I didn't back down from a lot of things, but I always had a real strong sense of right and wrong. And I still do, and sometimes it did get me into trouble when I thought I was being screwed over by someone in a position of authority. I just didn't have that trust, and I just didn't have that guidance. So yeah, it was rough, but
man, you've touched on a lot of things we've talked about over the last couple of days. Doc Barry, I knew he was going to jump in here.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Doc.
That's one of the things that's in the paper that Nathan and I have presented around the country 15 times is a lot of people who come from difficult backgrounds, they look for the service to provide a sense of family and, as you say, structure and whatnot. But often many of them go in with a very conflicted sense of dealing with authority figures.
Right.
So the die is cast from a very early point on. Who can you trust? Who do you not trust?
Right.
And a lot of folks are put in the position of fending for themselves while not being allowed to just be kids.
Yeah.
And I think I heard that's what you were saying just now. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like like the story I'll talk about what it was to sacrifice to earn things. I played football, and I lived 5 miles from school. So where I lived, I didn't have a parent that could pick me up and take me to and from practice or two-a-days, which was the issue. So it was left in my lap. If you have two-a-day practices coming up in the summer, and you'll figure out a way to get there because we have to work. So I had this broken 10-speed bicycle, and I would ride 5 miles to practice, get the shit beat out of me for 2 hours by the upperclassmen, then ride home 5 miles, and then do it again in the evening. But the funny thing was that there was a 4-lane highway, State Route 33, that I would have to navigate traffic. So in the mornings, I'm playing dodge 'em with the rush hour guys going into Columbus to go to work. And then in the evenings, they're coming home from work, and I'm playing another game of chicken. Meanwhile, I've got one of my coaches who we weigh in every morning and afternoon, and he's yelling at me like, if you don't keep your weight steady, you're not going to play ball. And as a kid in 1985, as a freshman, I'm like, yes, sir. No, coach. No, yes. I didn't know to talk back. I knew better. But I didn't have the balls to tell the guy, hey, man, I'm riding a bicycle 20 miles a day, 6 days a week. What do you want from me?
Right.
And I would give anything to have to do that now because, I'm such a fat fuck. But
I resemble that remark.
But, but that's what I had to do until I became old enough to drive and I could borrow a car and, I rode a bicycle. But it was part of that sacrifice and that responsibility. Basically, if you tell the coach, I'll be there, you knew to be there. I mean, that's the coach
right.
And Mike Yanati and those guys were Mr. Locke, the head coach. He was a Marine for 2 years, 57 to 59. And actually he wrote a letter of recommendation for me to get into the Marine Corps. And I paid him back when he passed away in 2012. I put on my dress blues and I presented the flag to his widow and to his son and daughter on behalf of him
nice.
At his service.
Nice.
So it came full circle.
Hey, Tony, for what it's worth, you're kind of leaning over to the right again in your frame. Yeah, that's better.
I've kind of just noticed this only recently. It's kind of funny. A lot of people with an adverse childhood background, they tend to go towards those MOSs, mostly combat arms, where there's that same kind of discipline, or somebody's always, it's not an easy life necessarily, right? Like the other MOSs, it can almost be a 9-to-5 job. But on the infantry, your combat arms, you're living with the people that you that you work with.
Right.
It just doesn't go away.
Well, people think of you as a grunt, crayon eater, ASVAB waiver, whatever. I scored high on the ASVAB, but what was funny was my recruiter, he was no bones about it. He said, you good scores, I can guarantee you any MOS, as long as you don't go near avionics or aviation, because your math scores were such shit, I can't even let you pick up a wrench near an aircraft. That's how bad. and the ironic thing is as a radio man, we had incoming mortar rounds one day, and the platoon commander calls in the fire mission into the FDC, and he gives the direction to target 100 degrees, 100, and FDC calls back and says, we need that in Mills. And the lieutenant looks around, he goes, he wants it in Mills. Now I'm face down in the dirt, and I peeked my head up and I yelled, 17-60, and I put my head back down. And I don't know where it came from. I don't know how I knew there were 17.6 mils per degree on a compass, 6,400 mils, 360, but I spit it out. And so I've never done algebra. I'm 51, but I can tell you how many the focus.
I didn't think that was going to be the answer. I thought you were going to tell me the FDC walked you through, like they make you do in training.
I think I had taken the MCI on indirect fire, call for fire, something stupid, and Mills, the conversion. And I wasn't a mortarman at that point. I was an 0311, a rifleman. Yeah. But yeah, man, and lieutenant afterwards, like, where'd that come from? Would the lieutenant like me to clean his pistol, sir? I don't know.
Right.
Now that's weird that the lieutenant asked where it came from, because you would think that he would just try to play it cool, like oh yeah, everybody knows that.
Right. He's like, where'd it come from?
Right.
Came from me trying to save my ass. That's where it came from.
Because I know. Having gone, I was an enlisted instructor at the basic school, and then I went through it. But they get taught there, and if they go to School of Infantry, they're taught. But man, so when you talked about taking the incoming mortars, which operation were you on at that time?
It would have been. I think it was Desert Storm at that point. Yeah,
that's what I thought you were going to say. So yeah, I like it when I can ask somebody that question, and it does come up to be Desert Storm question, because lately I've been really irritated by the idea of the 100-hour bloodless war, and it just drives me nuts. And we almost lost our company radio man, kind of same consequences after the first obstacle belt. So I fully expected that you were going to say in Iraq. So.
Any question about that? You've mentioned that 100-hour thing in the past. Can you, for myself and anybody who's in the audience who doesn't know, if you can expand on that?
Good question, Doc.
You guys use acronyms constantly. I know maybe a third of them. So for the idiot Ivy Leaguer amongst you, as well as anybody who's in the studio audience, tell what the acronyms all mean.
Do you want to answer that one, Tony, since I've done it several times in here?
Well, okay, so which acronym are you referring to? Because we spit out so many without thinking.
I'll let you know. I'll wave at you next time you do it.
And I try to be mindful of that, because I've heard that before. You speak Marines and nobody else does. And
Well, so which task force were you with in Desert Storm? You were with Ripper, okay. Oh, so Ripper definitely knows it wasn't a 100-hour war, since you guys went in a day before everybody else.
Well, I usually just, when people would make offhanded comments about, wasn't much of a war, you guys, 4 days of fighting, and it's like, well, tell that to the poor guys from 3rd LAR or LAI who got strafed by the
acronym.
Or
acronym.
Light armor. It was the LAV-25 vehicles that we had, but
it's a wheeled armored personnel carrier,
right?
but its primary role is not to carry personnel.
And it's definitely not to go into water either, even though they believe that they're amphibious.
Yeah.
And that's just a part of my little my Navy career started with 2nd Amphibious Assault Battalion, so AAVs.
Right.
So we, obviously we have to make fun of the LARs because we always have to pull them out of the mud out in Camp Lejeune.
Yeah, it's like, I think they were designed for fording. That's not supposed to be anything else than that. So to get back to Doc Berry's question, the 100-hour war is when they made the big deal. And so those of us in country, we didn't know what everybody was watching back home. Like we would get the Stars and Stripes, and if you're the infantry and you're out there near the border, you were lucky if it was only a week old. So you never really knew what was going on. And we didn't know that, everybody back home was just watching the war at dinner, kind of like they did back in Vietnam, watching all the watching the Air Force basically drop all their $1 million weapons. And according to whenever they officially announced the ground war start, it was 100 hours to Colin Powell made sure that it was 100 hours from the time they stopped it. He tried to stop it the day before. But so people they refer to the 100-hour ground war. They're like, oh, it's only 4 days. And I'm like, you know what? Even if you took it those 4 days and you look at how many people were there and how many casualties they are still some of the highest casualties we've had in 30 years.
Well, I mean, a lot I would imagine there's such a thing as a New York minute, and therefore a lot can happen in 100 hours.
Yeah. Like
Definitely.
When you fill in your fighting holes, and then, T-55s roll into the task force.
Yeah.
And there's nowhere to go, but that's another long story. So Tony, after Desert Storm, did you do anything, training wise, before you headed out to the 15th MEU?
At that point, when I went over to 2-9, 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, they had just come back from a combined arms exercise, a CAX down at Stumps, 29 Palms, and we did the Marine Expeditionary, the SOCX, or Special Operations Capable Exercises. So we did, I think it was Colonel Usher and Tandem Thrust, I think were what they were called, going back. But we just did a lot of individual company-based training. Like we were tasked by company. I was with Echo Company, for example, and we started off as the track or Amtrak company, and then they made us the helicopter company. So we did, so everything we did was, going to be helicopter based. Helo, I got sent to Hearst Master helicopter rope suspension.
Oh, yeah.
I went to Hearst Master training. But we just did a lot of practice with the helicopters, long range raids. We did a lot of ship to shore exercises aboard from the USS Tripoli. We would load up on helicopters off the coast of California. Fly. I think one weekend training evolution, we went all the way to we went up to Fort Irwin, California for a long range raid. One weekend we actually went to Yuma, Arizona, and did a raid.
Oh man!
And that was for our air wing. I can't remember off the top of my head who our air support was. I know they were out of Tustin, the air station at the time, and the tail numbers on the birds were Yankee Tango, and they were the Night Riders. I think it was 164 or 364. Anyway,
I can never remember them either.
It always changed, but we actually had kind of a funny story. We did this long range raid, and we went to Yuma, and at one of the fueling resupply points, a FARP site, the big helicopters, the CH-53s essentially took all the fuel that was at this FARP site, leaving nothing for the CH-46s, for the Frogs. So we got diverted to Barstow, California, to the logistics base out there in the middle of nothing. And we landed at this airfield, and immediately we just went to an administrative stand down because we didn't know how long we were going to be there. We didn't know if anybody knew we were there. But I had a squad, and the platoon commander, I had the lieutenant. When they called for platoon sergeants, I ran up because we didn't have a full platoon. It was just 2 squads and the lieutenant. We were we went light. It was for a tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel trap practice. And when I went up to the command post, the CP, the company commander, he said, "Admin, stand down." The major that's with us, which battalion executive officer, the XO, he's going to go get chow. He's got somebody giving him a ride into town. Just get your Marines under shade, kick back, and listen for the call. We'll come back. And all right, so I go back and I tell the lieutenant, "Sir, we're at a stand down. I'm going to go ahead and put my Marines. I'm going to take we're going to build hooches over here, tents, and get under them because it's Barstow. There's no shade." And I wanted to kill him. This lieutenant says, "Well, nobody told me we were at admin stand down, so you need to stay tactical." And I'm like, "I just told you, sir." And so he said, "I want security set on the helicopter." I go, "There's 2 pilots and 2 crewmen. They can set their own security." No, we're the trap mission. You've got your orders. And so I was so pissed off at this guy, this asshole, that I went to my squad, and they were already racked out. They're snoring. I grabbed my rifle and a canteen, and I went and I sat on the ramp of the CH-46, and I was security.
Just stood it yourself.
Get away from everybody. And one of the crew members comes over to me, and he said, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm your security." And they're out on their lawn chairs. This is the air wing. They're out of their flight suits. They're with their PPE gear, and they're getting sun. I mean, they got a little radio going, and the guy's he goes, "We got a cooler of water here. Help yourself." And I'm like, all right. So at least I had cold water. But then I look, and under one of the Cobras that was sitting out there, and one of the attack gunships, Cobra, I see the form of Second Lieutenant Barge, and he's racked out. He's asleep under the fucking helicopter.
I knew you were going to say that.
And I was like, "You son of a bitch." So we get the word to mount up. We're going back to the ships. They figured out the fuel problem or whatever. They refueled the helicopters. One of the Cobra crewmen, one of the pilots, his Nomex flight gloves. He can't find them. And of course he says, "One of the grunts stole my gloves." So
yeah, because we love flight gloves.
So the company gunny says, "Shake down your Marines, make sure nobody was near the Cobra so we can shut this guy up." And so I tell my Marines, "Anybody go near the helicopter, dump your ass packs," because we didn't have anything but our personal gear. So we had the old Alice gear, the old Alice gear. And so we had the ass packs, so everybody dumps their pack, no gloves. We get in a line. We're going back to get in our sticks. Here comes Lieutenant Barge. "Have your men form up so I can search them." And I said, "No." And he looks at me. I said, "Sir, I searched them. We don't have any gloves." I go, "As a matter of fact, Lieutenant, you were the only one near that Cobra, so let me search your shit." And he didn't like that, but he was just, I don't know where the guy, I don't know at what point this second lieutenant forgot to listen for the pop. Nobody taught him at infantry officer course or TBS to listen for the pop. And the pop is the sound that you'll hear the first time you pull your head out of your ass. And listen for the pop. But
I haven't heard that in so long.
This man, he did, later on, when we go back to the ship, I was in front of the first sergeant and the company XO, and they're like, "What happened out there?" And I just said, "All due respect, Second Lieutenant Barge auditioned for a fragging every 3 seconds with us." And I laid it down from the top to the bottom. I said, the Captain Hall, put it out there. We're at a stand down. Get your people under shade. he ordered me to put my Marines in a tactical position. We were out of chow. We were out of water. The XO actually went to a Safeway with a civilian that gave him a ride, busted out his credit card,
Wow.
fed that, the element that was out there. And
Out of his pocket, man.
That was just one of the many things that you saw in the Marine Corps going from the 80s into the 90s, when you still had that element of senior leadership who missed Vietnam, and they were making up for it through, with this kind of stupidity.
And a lot of them were children of Vietnam vets too. Yeah.
But there's that incident. I mean,
what was? I mean, just think about this. What the hell was going through his mind? I mean, let's say you had always just followed along willingly with everything he said and just ignored your rank. Was he expecting that he was going to run that platoon all the time as the only leader in the platoon? This is nuts.
The funny thing was, you could gauge a platoon by two things, and the one thing you could gauge was how tight they were as far as the interactions between the squads, and the other thing was the position that the platoon sergeant took. And the platoon sergeant we had at that point, he was on his way out. He was a 19-year staff sergeant. He knew he was out at 20. He got jammed up on the drill field, so he had a double-signed fitness report that meant he would never make rank. He knew it, and he had basically checked out. And he didn't
retired on active duty.
Do enough to reel the lieutenant in.
Right.
Yeah.
Which honestly, you can't blame him, because he must have stuck his neck out at one point. But on the other hand, he wasn't doing that officer any good. And we had a couple of guys, officers, that were a little hard headed about things. Like, we had one particular officer when we were underway on the ship, when we were actually at sea. He would make it a habit. He'd come down into the enlisted berthing area where the company was billeted at. He would just walk in and walk around looking for people to shoot the shit,
leadership by walking around.
We tried to tell him tactfully, hey, we don't come up to the blue deck, officer country, to look for you in your 6-man stateroom. If you need somebody, stand there at the stairwell, at the ladder well, have somebody come down and get your boy and take him to the mess deck or the hangar deck and hang out. But
he was doing this outside of the normal working, off the training schedule.
It was whenever he just felt the need or the urge, and so,
man, can't you find a friend or something?
And that was the thing. I mean, he was right from Canoe U, the Naval Academy. And so he was kind of a stud in his own mind. And
hey, Tony, I simply can't understand why you lost your job at the State Department.
Well, I didn't lose it. I retired, Doc. But I know where it is. It's right where I left it. Which is right there. With the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Right where I left the parking lot.
That says something too, that in his off time, or what should have been his off time, he wasn't hanging out with any of the other lieutenants.
He was, but it would be like we'd be down there after hours, after evening chow, and then all of a sudden there he is. He just pops up out of nowhere. Hey, sir, can we help you? No. How's it going? You guys okay? We'd be a lot better if you'd go back to where you came from.
Right.
But,
you want to see your Marines? We'll be up on the hard deck tomorrow morning at 7:30. Yeah.
But it really was a different Marine Corps back then than what it was when I left the Marine Corps for good in 2010. There was an incident when we got back off that deployment. I was checking out, and I was witness to a couple of times officers were bumping chests at, like a pissing contest. And a couple of times they were company grade, captain below. And one other time it was actually field grade. It was a colonel, a bird colonel, and a lieutenant colonel. It was our MU commander and our battalion CO. But this particular instance happened at Pendleton, and I was checking out. I was walking through the battalion area, and my company commander stopped me, and he said, "I need you to run this upstairs to Captain whomever, and let him know that that's fine. Just pass that on to him." I'm like, "Aye, aye, sir." So I take off, and I go up to this other officer. He was in the S. He was one of the S shops. I can't remember if it was the 3 or the 2. It wouldn't have been 2. It might have been. It doesn't matter. And he's on the phone, and I'm standing in the hatchway, at modified, parade rest, holding this form, and he puts his phone down. He goes, "You need something?" And I said, "Yes, sir. Captain, sent me here to give you this." And he just goes, I don't deal with NC. I don't deal with corporals." And then he put his phone up and walked away. So I'm like, wow, he just dismissed me. Like I had no business being up there.
Wow, yeah.
And that wasn't unheard of, in the 90s. So what got comical is I walk back downstairs after taking care of my business, and my company commander sees me and he says, "Did you take care of that thing?" And I said, "No, sir, I didn't." And he like, "Well, okay, what's your problem?" And I said, "Captain McDonald, he doesn't deal with corporals, sir. So I guess you have to do it." And my company commander at the time, he was a big guy. He wasn't a football player. He was a gymnast. So he was beefy. He was cut, and the man was chiseled. He was strong, and you didn't mess with him. It wasn't going to end well with you. And so he grabs that form out of my hand and starts marching, walking up the hallway. And here comes that other captain. And he walks right up to the captain, grabs his T-shirt, his blouse, opens his skivvy shirt, puts the form down it, and puts it there and says, "You might not deal with my corporal, but you don't want to deal with me again." And I was standing there, and this captain's like, "Well, I understand, but do you think maybe you could have done this privately instead of belittling me in front of an enlisted Marine?" And my captain looked at me and says, "Did you see anything?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, sir, I saw everything." And I'm like, I got to get out of here. I'm checking out. I was a short timer. I had no fucks left to give. So I walked by and eyeballed that captain as I walked by him, like, you put your leg on the same way I do, dude. One leg at a time.
Yeah.
You just have an assistant help you. But
was he an 03 captain, or was he like the Wago or something?
I just know he wasn't in the company, but he was in the battalion. So he was at that staff level. He might have been the S4.
Yeah.
I don't.
So a lot of times the guys that get stuck there in the staff didn't want to go there. They got put there.
Right.
Like take them out of the line code.
Yeah.
But you did, and I tell that story, and some of these newer guys who are Marine officers now, they're like, "There's no way that's true." And it's like, bud, you weren't in the Marine Corps in the 80s and 90s when that kind of shit was commonplace. It doesn't happen now. I've never seen it, but
even all the way up into the mid 2000s, up until about 2005, 6ish, it was still that way, you know. I mean, it's kind of like, the way I see it is when I came in 1999, which was a little bit after you and Nate. I mean, if a gunny or Navy chief is walking down the P-way or the hallway for our civilian folks out there, you put your back up against that wall, regardless of how much space there was, right? It could that hallway could be 12 feet wide. You still put your back against that wall and allow that gunnery sergeant, that first sergeant, that chief, senior chief to just walk on by, and you greeted them. Right. Now after like the mid 2000s, everyone's going to war, so no one gives a shit about rank anymore. It's like, these young lance corporals, and I get it, man. You've been deployed 3 times. You've seen your shit, 20 years of combat, but still, I mean, these gunnies and first sergeants and senior enlisted personnel have earned their respect to a certain level as well, too, know, and it's different. It has changed quite a bit, some for the good. In my personal opinion, some things for the bad. I think a lot of that structure that you talk about, Tony, that I believe you were looking for when you first went to the Marine Corps, because you didn't have it at home, right? I feel a lot of it is being lost because we're trying to accommodate for a new culture, for a new generation, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Well, yeah, like, you coming from being a a corpsman supporting, Marines. Like I remember the corpsman we had at 2-9, and and it was split down the middle. Half of them did the Marine Corps uniform regs where they wore the uniforms.
Mm-hmm.
The other half stayed on the Navy side, with the Dixie caps and the jumpers. And but one of our corpsmen, he was the lead petty officer. He was an HM2, petty officer second class. When we were in Baidoa, Somalia, one of the Marines in my platoon, we thought he had amoebic dysentery. He was sick. He couldn't hold anything in or down. He was vomiting. He was shitting himself. And so when I went to the doc, I'm like, we got to get this guy back to the ship, getting checked out. This doc's like, what are you, a doctor? What the fuck do you know? And I'm like, Doc, man, the guy he's pissing and shitting. He can't hold shit in. It's 110 degrees outside, and Doc's reading his book, and he's like, give him peanut butter and cheese and a bottle of water, and come back, in a couple of hours. And so we're feeding this guy MRE cheese and peanut butter to plug him up. Doc, it doesn't seem like he cares, but on the background, he's actually going to the medical officer to say, we're treating this guy, but he's somebody we might want to look at. We're going to see what he does in 24 hours. And we make the joke, Motrin, water, clean socks, get back to work,
Mm-hmm.
Because anything more than that, when you get out, you'll file for disability and the VA will give you 10%. But when our company Gunny tried to pull something, our corpsman shut him down. And I remember, this standoff between this gunnery sergeant in E7 and this petty officer 2 in the Navy in E5, and Doc Anderson looked at Gunny and said, as much as you think you do, you don't have the fucking authority. And
yep.
I was like,
wow.
And all I could think of is kill him quietly, Gunny, just kill him quietly. But Doc Anderson probably would have kicked the shit out of the Gunny. He was a tough guy. You didn't fuck with Doc Anderson.
But he was standing up for his Marines, right?
Right.
They were working towards the same point, if I remember what was going on. It had something to do with water and with hygiene, but they were coming at it from two different points of view. Going back 30 years, 29, 30 years ago, the memory gets a little hazy, but what I took from that was, here's Doc Anderson telling the Gunny, you don't have the authority to tell me to do that. I don't answer to you, actually. So let's go talk to my boss, the battalion surgeon. It was just little shit like that, but you come away with it. I think the biggest shock for me was our battalion commander. He wasn't well liked within the battalion. He was kind of a petty disciplinarian. He was kind of a tyrant over stupid shit. We were in country at this point, like 2 weeks, and we were doing active foot patrols out around the Baidoa area, and we were recovering and seizing these mortar systems that the Somalis had, and they were the Russian 122 millimeter mortars, the big ones, or 120s.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
I remember them.
When we found them, we would call back to hire because we couldn't hand carry them out. We'd have to have Motor T send out a truck. And so we'd set security on it. The truck would come out. We'd load it into the truck, hop in the truck and go back. And then I was a squad leader, so I would go and meet with the S2, the intel officer, and show him on the map where I found it and answer his questions or whatever. So we're back in the Baidoa command post for 15th MU, and there's a meeting going on, and I overhear our battalion commander, and he was really concerned with appearances, in that he actually had a gear diagram drawn up of how we were supposed to wear our combat load, our deuce gear. And he had two diagrams, one for a left-handed shooter, one for a right-handed shooter. It didn't matter if it was comfortable or it just had to look good. It was because Newsweek, Time, Rolling Stone, all these magazines were there taking pictures, and so he was worried about that shit, right? And I hear him, and he says, "Well, we need to come up with some kind of name that's catchy, that rolls, that a task force name so that we're known in the media as we have an identity. So we're not just those Marines. We really need to have an identifying a name, a task force, something. And our MU commander, he was a Colonel Newbold, later Lieutenant General Newbold. Colonel Newbold is standing there, and I see him. He gets this look on his face, and he pinches the bridge of his nose, and I just see him look, and he goes, "Well, why don't we call ourselves Task Force Tom?" And he points at the BC. He goes, "We'll name it after you." And walks away. And me and the S2 chief, the master sergeant, he looks at me and he says, "We need to get the fuck out of here now." And so we stopped.
That is an uncomfortable moment.
A few months later, we were in Pearl Harbor. We were on our way back to Camp Pendleton, and so we had that 24 hours at Pearl Harbor. And I was manning the rails. I was in the Charlie uniform, and I feel this presence come up behind me, and out of my peripheral, I can see it's Colonel Newbold. And I lock at attention. I hand salute, and I give him a greeting, and he salutes. He goes, and he called me by name, Corporal Storey, right? And I said, "Yes, sir." And I don't know where he picked up. I mean, we didn't wear name tapes. We had the chocolate chip camis, but he knew who I was standing in Charlie's in March or April of '93, 3 full months after his little blow up. And he said, "How did you enjoy your deployment, your time? Did you come away with ask me some questions? Where were you from? And this, that, and the other. Are you going to you getting out of the Marines? What are you going to do?" And he says, "All right, well, good luck." And I go to salute, and I said, "Sir, I have a question." He goes, what do you got?" And I said, "Did we ever settle on Task Force Tom?" And he stiffened up a little bit and goes, "I thought that was you." And then he saluted me. And so it was kind of bittersweet years later when, after 9/11, when he was the commanding officer of the ground forces and CENTCOM as a major general, lieutenant general, and he got relieved by President Obama for making his comment about eviscerating the Taliban. I thought he was going to be commandant. I mean, the guy was just dead on, and
he would have. Too many of the generals, they lose their positions purely by politics. Yep. Oh man, that's a common theme that I've heard people say too. Is they'll talk about some memorable moment when some senior officer remembers something about what they did or who they are, and then you find out it turns out years later they're all wearing stars. Mm-hmm. It's something. I mean, that shows you about how important it is.
And I'm still wearing stripes.
Well, I don't know if I mean, like, that's either because they've got that right kind of mindset that they can handle all that kind of information, or maybe that's part of their development and what makes them so well liked, and they turn out to be great leaders. Mm-hmm. And so when you guys went to Baidoa, did you have that same second lieutenant still?
Yeah. At that point, I had left 3rd Platoon, and at that point I went over to Weapons Platoon. We had a bunch of Marines get promoted, corporals to sergeants, and so to spread load the NCOs, I took over a mortar team, not the section because I wasn't a mortarman, but I took over a squad, took over a gun. Yeah. But I would basically, if a patrol was going out, I'd grab my rifle and ask my platoon sergeant, Gunny Rod, "Can I go with these guys?" And get out of here, and I'd go help and just to get out of the CP and away from working parties and whatnot. But yeah, after I left the Marine Corps that following June of '93, I did find out that lieutenant. I mean, he made it all the way to lieutenant colonel. He floated all the way up to got his oak leaf and became an officer with LAI, and I think he ended up he ended up leaving the Marine Corps, but.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible to go to full bird as an infantry officer.
But he, I don't know. I don't know. There were some underlying issues that was going on there. I mean, in our company, he was the only officer that didn't go to a service academy. He didn't go to the Naval Academy. He didn't go to VMI. He went to a
Yeah.
college and got commissioned through NROTC. So I think there was maybe a little bit of a pecking order that was going on behind the scenes
Yeah.
on that. And he was, he was a man of color, and that may have played into it as well. You don't want to admit that.
And
But you don't know.
Well, it was, and that was very unusual
Right.
in the 90s too. And I don't know how much of that, I think a lot of that had to do with self-selection. It just wasn't part of the culture
Right.
at the time. But yeah, I remember that that was just a standout thing. If you had an African-American infantry officer, it was because it was so unusual.
Right.
But, yeah, man.
Well, those academy grad people, they definitely, especially the Naval Academy. I've never served with the Air Force or Army, but the Naval Academy grad officers, from the moment they step foot onto the Naval Academy, they're being told that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and then they hit the fleet thinking that too, and it's like, calm your horses down. Like, you don't know shit, man. Like, you've been coddled for the last, how old are you now, sir? 24? You've been coddled for 24 years, man. Get the fuck out of here.
I think the best thing I heard out of a platoon commander that I served with that came from the Naval Academy was he said, I went to Annapolis, I got my degree, and he said it was a $150,000 education shoved up my ass a nickel at a time. And that's how he likened his time at Annapolis. So I'm sure now it's probably 300,000, with inflation.
Yeah.
But
those nickels are still getting shoved. Because when I retired, I worked for a contractor he had been an HMX-1 pilot, and he was a ring knocker. And when I got commissioned and went through, I saw all different types of it and stuff. But when he told me, especially that first year, I'd seen the shows on TV, but the crap that they put up with, it's amazing that any of them stay.
Yeah, because you figure, they basically get hazed willingly, for an entire summer. Which isn't unlike going to boot camp at Parris Island or MCRD San Diego, but then it continues on into the school year, their plebe summer, plebe year, and then more. But no, I don't know.
I think the ones who end up doing well in the fleet are the ones who can discern between, I got an education, but I still need to gain some wisdom, and and they're humble about it.
Yeah,
because I've met some academy grads that completely surprised me that they were, and then there's the ones that are obvious.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I found out.
You guys realize for the past hour, and I've been listening. I haven't been saying much, but I've been listening. All you guys have been talking about is what it's like to deal with people in positions of authority, what you like and what you don't, and how huge that is for you guys. Command.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Doc Barry, you've heard me tell you before we'd go out to mount training up at Fort Ord, and we had a lieutenant that as soon as it kick off, he got shot in the back every single time. And he was always like, man, again? And we were like, damn, sir. But he was one of those guys that, a lot like stuff that Tony's talking about, where he just didn't respect anybody's rank down the chain of command. And, nobody wants to be led by him. And especially when wait, if the lieutenant doesn't make it, then the platoon sergeant's got it. Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's also scary too when you have leaders, whether they're at a company, battalion level, regimental level, doesn't matter, right? And you're out, whether you're doing an exercise, a training exercise, or you're in a real world mission. And that's where I would train my junior corpsmen, where you have to have that knowledge of what Marine Corps instruction, Navy instruction, and what it is that your role is as a young, because you have 18, 19, 20-year-old men and women, right, that have to basically stand their ground against sometimes a lieutenant colonel or a major, right, an 05, an 06, whatever. and tell them, sir, ma'am, I understand that you are the commander of this company, but I'm telling you right now, what you are asking your Marines to do is going to go against my recommendation as your only healthcare provider out here. Yes, I'm not a doctor, right? But my battalion surgeon has told us what is our left and right lateral limits. And all I'm going to tell you, sir, ma'am, is if you go that route, I have to report you. And you see a lot of them like, whoa, how are you going to report me?
Right.
I'm just doing this. I'm letting you know that due to my medical advice, you're going against it. I will have to report this. And no, I am not stepping off with you. So you now, not only am I going to report you, now you're trying to do a mission without medical support as well, too. So what's more important to you, sir, ma'am?
You know, Doc, on that, I had an incident when I was in Iraq in 2007. I had a corpsman that got assigned. I was with a PIT team, a police training transition team, as part of the police implementation office that I was assigned to at Regimental Company Team 6. And this corpsman, you know, we didn't have the same corpsman. They would come over every 2 or 3 days. We would get one, and they would rotate them in and out. But this guy, they tried to stick me with. He was an E3HN. He wasn't a petty officer, but I found out later that the reason he was in Iraq was because he was working at the sleep clinic in San Diego, Balboa Naval Hospital, and got caught playing with the government computers after hours when he was supposed to be monitoring sleepers in the sleep clinic. He was in these adult sex rooms, these chat rooms, you know, sending pictures of his junk to these women. And so he got nailed, and his punishment was reduced in rank and sent to Iraq. And so when I went over to the battalion aid station, BAS, there to get a corpsman to go over to the range with, this chubby guy comes out. He's this is your new corpsman, and take him with you. And then one of the other corpsmen pulls me aside and says, keep an eye on him. He's new. We're trying to break him in, but he's a little goofy. And so the first day, we've got Iraqi locals that are working with us. And so this guy was told, if Iraqi gets hurt or has an injury, address it, handle it. And if it's something you can't deal with, call us, but go through, Storey, Staff Sergeant Storey. So one morning, we're getting up, getting ready to go out and start the plan of the day. And there's a line of Iraqi trainees. And then there's this corpsman, there's Doc, Urich sitting there. And I go, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm doing BAS call. I'm med call for these guys, sit call. I said, we don't do sit call for the locals. If they have a wound, you patch it. If they have an ache, give them Motrin. But we don't run sit call for these assholes. You don't do it, because I've got a class of 50 and 22 of them are in line because you're going to give them something free. And so he says, well, one of these men has what I think is he's got a jelly-like mass in his abdomen. It very well could be a lymphoma. And I said, so you're doing a cancer diagnosis out here in Camp Thrasher? I said, no. I go, we're not playing this game. So one guy had a scab on his head. So this guy's field dressing this nick that this guy got when he got his hair cut. It's just stupid shit. And this was, my medical professional who I rely on, and he's out there, basically, trying to get, I don't know what he was doing. He wanted sainthood.
Yeah.
And
he thought it was Doctors Without Borders.
Yes, Doctors Without Frontiers, Sans Frontiers. And the some bitch, it got to the point where I finally had to call over to BAS to say to the chief, you need to send somebody out here before I break his head. I'm done. He's running sit call. Diagnosed this guy with lymphoma. And so the chief, when he gets done laughing, he comes out and he's like, we don't run sit call. He kind of runs the guy through it. And he grabs me and says, well, that guy that he diagnosed, he's got a hernia. It's a hernia he was pushing on. I said, so what Dr. Kildare here thought was a fucking cancerous tumor was actually his intestine coming through a hole in his abdomen. He goes, well, yeah. I said, what do we do about it? He goes, nothing. All these guys have hernias. For Christ's sake, they don't live right. I mean, but then I find out how he come to be in Iraq with me was he got caught jerking off at the sleep clinic with some girl on an internet computer.
Oh my goodness. Right.
That's a stroke of bad fortune right there, gentlemen.
Yeah. But, and it's unfortunate because in the Navy corpsman community, that happens so often, where it seems like someone gets in trouble on blue side, so their punishment is give them orders to the green side. The Marines will fix them, but it doesn't work that way, because I personally feel this, and this is just my personal opinion. This isn't Navy fact or anything. But you as a corpsman, you really have to have a desire to work alongside Marines, in order to be successful in that environment. And I think that's what saved my career. I got into so much trouble my first 4 years that when we found out we were going to Iraq in 2002, we all got recalled back on December 28th. December 28th, we all got recalled because we had to be on the ships by January 7th to float over to Kuwait. I was on 60 days of restriction. I always laugh because I always joke around that my restriction was actually 8 months long, because I was on day 57 when we embarked on the ships. So I had 3 days of restriction left, but then we're on a ship to go to Kuwait. So anywho, but yeah, no one wanted to take me because I was the troublemaker. Everyone was like, man, Fonseca, right. he's a great fucking corpsman, but on his off hours, like, you just can't trust him, and I would joke like that too, but like, I'll toot my own horn. I'm a great fucking corpsman, but I'm a shitty fucking sailor. But it was a gunny, Gunnery Sergeant David Myers and Lieutenant Tracy Connor, that I guess now I know how it works, because back then I was just an E2, so I didn't know how planning and all that worked. But when they're all sitting around, AAVs is one of those battalions that, unlike a grunt companies usually will have a corpsman attached to them for the whole time. They don't get shifted around too much. With AAVs, tanks, LAR, even artillery units, the corpsmen all fall under headquarters and support company, so right. H&S company. And then whatever company needs a corpsman, then you just get sent over to them and you go do field op with them, or you'll go do a deployment with them, but you don't necessarily stay with them. So when they were all sitting around the round table saying, hey, we're going to take this corpsman, well, this corpsman's already been with our company, we're taking them. I later came to find out that David Myers, Gunny Myers, like, well, what about Doc Fonseca? He's a great freaking doc. And I was like, no, we don't want to deal with that headache. And he was like, well, shit, I'll take him. Like, he's perfect. Right. Like, I got a company full of misfits. He was the gunny that any Marine or anyone that was in trouble, they just dumped it on him, because he just was that one of those type of leaders that just knew how to take us that were like broken inside or had some issue with authority or just didn't know how to play. Yeah. Or just didn't know how to play by the rules because we wanted to make our own rules up. He was just that gunny that you just fell in line with for whatever reason. His presence, his demeanor, the way he carried himself, and the way he didn't bullshit you, I remember when I found out I was going over to them for Iraq, he pulled me in his office, him and Lieutenant Connor. And they're like, all right, Doc, you're going with us to Iraq. I was like, roger that, sir. Roger that, Gunny. I was like, good to go. I was like, I'm glad I'm getting a chance to go with you guys. Like, don't be glad yet. And Gunny stood up on his table like this. And, he's going to slam their hands. And he slams his hands on the table. And he goes, let me get something straight with you right now, Doc. I was like, yes, Gunny. He goes, I don't fucking like corpsmen. The corpsman in Desert Storm left us to die. He goes, so just stay the fuck out of my way. I was like, oh, roger that, Gunny. But for me, I thrived in that environment because I was like, all right, I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to prove him that not every corpsman was like that one back in 1990 or 1991
Right.
that left them, you know, and lo and behold, I mean, me and David Meyer are till this day great friends. In the Battle of Al Nasiriyah, when the smoke kind of was clearing down a little bit, he gave me such a big hug and said, "You did a great job, Marine." And I was like, "Excuse me, Gunny?" He goes, "Don't ever forget, you're one of my Marines now." I was like, and of course, like I start bawling. I was like, "Roger that, Gunny." And he's like, Go get on the radio. Let's start calling in these birds, Doc. You did great. I was like, roger that, Gunny. Like in the middle of a battle, a fire, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
The battlefield, you know, Papa made Papa proud, you know, and it felt that way. It really did, you know?
Shit.
But that's,
Say that's a real leader right
It
there,
is.
right? Because you don't want to disappoint him, and you want to do even better than you did. You know?
exactly. And I
Man.
attest so much to all the good things that I did in my Navy career. You know, I mean, my alcoholism, my PTSD, that was my own issues. But as far as how I wanted to lead my men and women, I attest a lot of my leadership traits to him. The no bullshit, the no frills. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything, but I 100% will be the first one to stand in front of anyone and back you up, just like he did with me. You know, he whenever anyone would say, "Oh, you got Fonseca, that piece of shit," he'd be the first one, like, "Shut the fuck up. You don't talk about my doc that way." I mean, to me, he would tell me I was a piece of shit, I was worthless,
Right.
and I better get my head out of my ass. But no one else could tell me anything. And it was. I wanted to make Papa proud, you know, and I did, fortunately, you know.
Nobody beats my family, but
he might be a piece of shit, but he's my piece of shit.
yes.
Yep. Since
I was gonna say, it
Go ahead.
reminds me, like I've actually got a fitness report that I got as a sergeant, where the reviewing officer in his comments, basically, you know, the one remark that he said that stuck out, that, and I can't believe he put it in my fit rep that goes into my official file. He just said, "Sergeant Storey does not hesitate to say what he thinks is right, regardless of who it might offend." And and so I took that as, I call a spade a shovel, and I don't care what's on your collar, because like when you talk about Gunny Davis, Doc, you have those leaders that that you learn from, that you emulate, that they say it exactly how it is, like it is. They can back it up, but it's that sense, that personal integrity that comes through. You know, I'm not going to tell you what you want to hear, because in this lifestyle that we're in, you know, this, you know, the warriorhood, or whatever you want to call it, platitudes can get you killed. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
Honesty will get you killed.
Yeah.
Anything will get you killed. It doesn't take much, but at least, you know, if you're not placating somebody, you've got a chance, which was one thing that I never translated over from my time in the Marine Corps to my time as a civilian police officer. I never learned to pull my punches. And so, yeah, I was for 20 years with my last agency. I was a problem child, and but I knew my job. I knew how to be. I was a good,
Right.
Nobody got hurt, and I knew what I was doing. But you know, a lot of what hung over my head was the stigma that of being a combat Marine, the PTSD diagnosis. You know, that put that target on my back for those who had never been in our situations, and honestly, it was almost like they expected me to make amends and apologize for serving this country and coming away from it with, you know, who I am now with those scars. So,
hey Tony, let me jump in at this point. I've worked with cops from various departments, and around here, I'm in New York. That's why I talk funny. But there always seems to be some sort of a divide in the police force between officers who have not served in the military and those who have. You're starting to talk about it now, and I was hoping you could expand on that. What did you experience in your department?
Well, in my over the course of 26 years, I was in 3 different agencies or departments, and the one that it seemed to rear its ugly head the most in was my last 20 years with the Ohio Department of Public Safety, with the investigative unit. The issue wasn't, it was more so not because I was prior military, but there was also a bigger division in that I came from a background where I was a street cop. I was a uniform officer who didn't go to college in order to qualify for that job. Or when I started the job in September of 2000, the requirements for employment were 5 years law enforcement experience with 3 years in an investigative capacity. And I had done 3 years as a narcotics detective with the sheriff's office. So I made that, but in lieu of that, you had to have a bachelor's degree in some discipline, criminal justice, criminology, whatever. And so there was a bigger divide between those of us who came from a uniform background and had real world street experience than those who came to that job directly from a college campus. So
Gotcha.
Compounding that with me coming from an infantry background, a combat background, the things that made me an effective officer were the things that scared them the most, like the hypervigilance, for example, where you're constantly scanning your surroundings, you're looking for the exits, the entrances, where your weapon's at. That those things that become second nature to me because of the repetitive nature of having been a Marine so long and an officer. They didn't appreciate that about me as much as they, it caused issue for concern. They didn't think I was a good cop because of my experiences. They thought I was damaged, and they would treat me that way. And it wasn't.
Wow.
And then when you throw in the other facet to that is that there was a lot of there were little divisions and cliques. There were the guys that went to their little academy of classes together. They went to college together, and they formed their little tribal bands, if you will. You had to watch. You couldn't trust anybody. And the thing, like I would tell people, is if somebody in the central office in Columbus, if they patted you on the back, it's because they were looking for a soft spot to stick the knife. And I would tell people, I wear a vest that's got panels in the front and back. The front is because there's bad guys might shoot at me. The back one is to keep my bosses from shooting me in the back if something goes wrong and they need a scapegoat. And it almost always came back around to the fact that I was a combat Marine, combat experience, and I had a PTSD diagnosis from the VA.
Okay.
And it kind of unraveled and started to really manifest itself was when I came back from Iraq in 2007. I had actually filed with the VA for disability in 2006. And while I was waiting for the decisions to come, and it took about a year and a half, I got recalled to active duty. I was in the inactive ready reserve at that point, and the Marine Corps cut me orders to go to Iraq. So while I was in Iraq, my decision was being decided by the VA. And when I came back from Iraq and I started returning to work in a full duty capacity, the VA announced, here's your disability. We declare you, initially I was at 70%. And it was, I had issues, the total disability at that was 70%, but the 50% was PTSD. And I told a coworker that I was getting a big back check and I was going to take my wife and kids. We were going to go do something. And my coworker, he was one of these, he talked out of both sides of his mouth. He hated the administration, but he was also in bed with the administration. So he took it upon himself. He tells my supervisor, I don't want to say the guy by name, but I'll call him the Apostle. And I call him the Apostle because he was heavily involved in his mega church, the church where the collection plate comes along and it's that little apple slider that you run your credit card through because they don't want to hear dollar bills hitting the collection plate. They just want to know that you're tithing what you want. One of those mega churches. And his religious conversion it came on the tail end of when he was working as we were plain clothes liquor agents is what we were. And he was working at a strip club, posing as a bouncer and got accused of improper conduct with one of the dancers. And it later found out, he'd been banging one of the strippers behind his wife's back. And,
oh, wow.
So this was long before I started, but his conversion to Christianity came on the tail end of that. He found God. Anyway, he was,
let me throw something in here. The presentation that I sent you about the old chief.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've had a chance to check it out. Yeah. One of the things that I talk about in there is negativity, which is exactly what you're talking about right now. Negativity as in clicks, which is what you just said a few minutes ago. Hypocrisy, which is what you got through saying just now. None of these things cause post-traumatic stress disorder, but I am here to tell you they aggravate the living bejesus out.
Oh yeah.
And the reason for this, and Nate and Louise have heard me say this too many times before. That's why they're falling asleep. God bless them. No, because at the heart and soul of the negativity of which we speak right now is selfishness.
Right.
Now, what am I emphasizing when I say that? And so I can say we with a clear conscience, a volunteer firefighter for a short period of time in the EMT. We were all trained to think of everybody else first and ourselves absolutely last. So that,
True.
And I'm not saying when civilians experience selfishness, to be sure, it's hurtful, but when first responders and especially combat guys experience selfishness, it's experienced viscerally. And when they experience it from each other, all bets are off. And that's the end of that lecture for tonight.
Right. And that's exactly what that was like because, he at that point, this guy, the Apostle, he was my immediate supervisor. And on a detail, he and I were working surveillance one evening. He offhandedly starts asking me questions about my recent deployment. I deployed from March to October of 2007. I came back to work in October, so this would have been March of 2008. And he lets me know that he's working on a PhD program through Capella University, for crying out loud. And
which is not accredited,
right,
just so you know. Go on.
But it looks good on paper. And so he's doing a paper on PTSD related to law enforcement and trauma and this, that, and the other. And he just starts kind of peppering me with some little innocent questions like, did they screen you? Yeah, no. What kind of questions they ask? What kind of things? And I finally, like I said, I don't have anything to hide. And I said, well, Harold, I said, I'll go back and look through my paperwork. I said, I can give you some material to kind of research on your own and go from there. So I told him about, I came back to the office the next day. I told him about the GAF scale, the GAF scale for functioning. And I said, for example, 0 to 100, it's a scale. They give you a number. And I said, I fell like a 54, 58, something like that. I said, I don't know, but look that up. And I said, they'll ask you questions about stressors. And I relayed an incident that occurred to me in Somalia, because at that point I didn't get screened for my time in Iraq. I had filed for disability based on Desert Shield Storm, Somalia, And so,
Yeah.
unbeknownst to me, the apostle, he's lining up to get me psychologically evaled for fitness for duty. I don't know what really got into somewhere in the 7 years prior to that, I'd worked with him. I must have pissed him off, and he saw his opportunity because he took it. And I came to work one day, and the director had sent down, we called him the GIMP. And so the GIMP came down to take my badge and my gun and to hand me my papers, let me know I was on paid administrative leave until further notice. And I said, well, what did I do? And they're like, well, we just need to make sure you're okay. I said, I've been back to work since October. It's March. I mean, I haven't had a problem in 8 months, but now you want to have me evaluated. And so as I'm being taken home, I'm on the phone with my union rep through the Fraternal Order of Police, and he's talking me off the ledge because I'm livid. And he explained, hey, the state, they have the right to screen anybody for any reason, fitness for duty. It's no big deal. We're going to send you to see the psychologist that handles the screening for new applicants. And he was a doctor I didn't like, never liked this guy. And I'm like, there's nothing I could do. So I still have no idea at this point why I'm being sent to see the wizard. And so 2 days later in the mail, I get my appointment. You report to this doctor at this time for this meeting. Don't be late. Don't blow it off. If you don't show up, you're going to be fired. So I go to the psychologist's office, and I buzz in. I tell the lady there who I am, why I'm there, and so she takes me into this conference room and hands me the 3 written tests that one of them was the Minnesota multiphasic, the MMPI-2, which I had taken like 6 or 7 times for various departments I'd applied through the year, and I'd taken it for this agency. She gave me those tests, and she explained how to do them and said, when you're done, bring them out to me. And so I took the battery of tests that I had taken 6 times prior through the years, and thinking like a Marine, I'm like, I want to get through this, remain calm. I'm okay. So I read through the questions and I answered them 5 at a time. And she told me, answer them how they answer whatever comes to your mind first. Just jot that, just notate it. Yes, no, whatever. So would I rather be a librarian or a florist? I don't care. I like books, shit like that. So I go through these tests and I take them out to her and I hand them to her, and she tells me to have a seat. I'm sitting there for about a half hour, and then they ring me and take me into this doctor's office. And I get in there, and this doctor, he just an Armani suit wearing, he was just a fucking an elitist snob is the only way I can describe. I never liked him, but I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. So he goes through his spiel. I don't represent you. I represent the state of Ohio. Nothing you say to me is confidential. We're going to discuss the results of your test. I'm going to ask you some questions. My report is going to go to your employers, and they'll make their decision based on my recommendation at that point. Goes to that shit. And he says, do you know why you're here? And I said, no, I don't. Nobody's ever told me. And then he gets pissy. He's like, so you mean to explain to me that you expect me to believe the state of Ohio just arbitrarily pulled you off the street and sent you to see me to get an evaluation, and you have no clue why? And I said, that's exactly what I'm telling you. I said, do you know who I work for? I said, these guys are pricks. And he said, well, this is a fitness for duty evaluation. And then he reads me the memorandum letter that the apostle typed up and drafted and sent to my director at the time. Basically, that he fears for my personal safety and based on my recent tour of duty in Afghanistan, which, for the record, it was Iraq. It's not even the same country. And so we're a law enforcement agency. This man is a college-educated PhD candidate through Capella University, and he can't even tell the difference between Afghanistan and Iraq. And we're cops. We're supposed to write reports in a concise, accurate manner, keeping the facts of the straight of the accusation. So when this doctor reads this to me, I'm listening to it, and he said, "All right, well, let's get started." He goes, "How are you feeling today?" And without missing a beat, I said it: hostile and uncooperative. And it just went from there. I kept my job, but from that point on, I was a marked man, and it was pure friction. And whereas, the state of Ohio, they put on this show like, hey, if you're not okay, it's okay to tell us, and we're going to help you. No, this isn't helping me. I didn't come to you to say I'm having problems dealing with, the Middle Eastern carryout owners or the Somali shopkeepers or anything. I'm not having any problems, but I just want to be a cop. I want to be a normal cop. I want to do my job. And you're not letting me. It's like you expect me to apologize to you because I served my country. And I'm not going to do it. And so I existed with that friction over my head with this guy for the better part from that 08, probably not 7 or 8 years, 9 years. I mean, and
wow.
It got to a point where he had a couple of his little disciples, guys that he took under his wing that were his little toadies. They started shit with me, and I found myself on administrative leave again because I lost my temper one night in the field. Told these idiots, you pull that stunt again, I'm beating the shit out of you. And it was, all we had to do was go into this particular bar in this area of Ohio, sit down, observe, act like patrons, hold a beer. These guys didn't do that. I go in and I do what I'm supposed to. One goes to the back corner of the bar by the pool tables. The other, he sits at the bar, and the bartender asks him, "Can I get you something?" And the guy goes, "Well, I have no money." The bartender says, "There's an ATM right there." And he goes, "Well, yeah, but I bank with so-and-so." He goes, the bartender says, "Oh, that's your bank. Well, the ATM for that's just on the end of the block there if you need to go get cash." So the guy gets up and walks out the door. Prior to walking into this bar, I had briefed these two idiots and said, this bar has got cameras everywhere because of the activity going on. There's one right over the front door, and I pointed it out to him. Where did that moron go stand while he was texting on his phone to his partner inside when they were sandbagging?
Yep.
In front of the fucking camera? And the bartender is looking at him going, it's 12 degrees above zero outside. That guy's fucking freezing, but he's playing on his phone. I don't know what's going on. And I'm like, these guys are trying to get me killed. I reacted the only way I knew how. You pull that again, we're fighting, because that's bullshit. Because I threatened them with violence, I threatened to beat their asses, and because of the previous history of my PTSD diagnosis, I was put on administrative leave, and I was put through the ringer. They even went as far as to charge me criminally with menacing. Where it all fell apart was because his apostles, Mikey and Marky, and that's their names, Marky, he couldn't keep his story straight. And so he lied in the investigation to the two investigators who questioned him on two separate occasions. And Mikey, well, while this was going on, he got indicted in a county in northern Ohio because he was found to be in possession of Schedule III narcotics because he was holding on to several, basically bulk amount of anabolic steroids. And so you're coming after me for being a menace to these guys. One can't tell the truth to save his life. The other one is trafficking fucking roids at the gym he works out at, and he got nailed, and he beat the charges. So the case kind of fell apart. But neither one of those assholes lost their jobs. And
wow,
I came back, and I had to work with them. Well, Marky, he got reassigned. They took him out as punishment. He should have been fired for lying under oath, perjury. But, the union cut the deals. So those instances have stuck with me, and they'll never leave. And like I said, I retired in March, and if I never see any of those guys again, it'll be too soon.
Hey, Tony, let me just jump in here. Speaking as a psychologist and psychoanalyst who goes to work every day in a Carhartt shirt, blue jeans, and sneakers, the clown in the Armani suit, whoever he is, gives the rest of us a very bad name. Okay. Now there's a little bit more. I know I'm kind of long-winded. I'm old. Bear
There's
with
some irony to this.
But but I have encountered officers who have had not run-ins as bad as this, but run-ins that were highly similar. And I have to do a lot of damage control when I'm working with these guys because they eventually become so symptomatic they come back to ask for help. But I got to clean up the mess from, made by the guy in the Armani suit.
Yeah.
And God bless you. That's the wrong way to handle it. And by the way, Capella University, unless my head is located in a warm, wet, brown, runny area, is not, I repeat, not accredited by the American Psychological Association. You got hosed.
Oh yeah, but that was par for the course for the Ohio Department of Public Safety. Like I said, the guys who got promoted, it was because shit floated, and it floats to the top. But the Armani suit guy, unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago from cancer, which, I take no joy in that. I mean, it is what it is. But his organization got nailed by the state of Ohio for ethics violations because some of his clinicians weren't licensed to give clinical diagnoses when they were screening first responders for some of these local jobs. And
wow.
I will send you, Doc Barry, I'll send you some information so you can look and read for yourself because it's out there. And so it's like,
hey, do me a favor. Do me a favor. If you're going to send me that, send me a bottle of booze too. All of a sudden, I want to start drinking.
But
I'm getting a headache.
But the thing is like I said, I got raked over the coals. And the one thing when I got my talking to by this time, the Highway Patrol had taken our agency over, and so I'm in this office with this major, and she's reading me the Riot Act, and calling you're a bully and you're unprofessional and you can't do this, and this. And she said, "Is there anything you want to say to me?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I laid it out for her. And I mean, I was respectful because I understood where she was coming from. It was kind of like the gunny with Doc Fonseca. I looked at her and I said, I fought for my country. I volunteered. I put myself out there, and I'm being judged for it. And I'm being judged unfairly because these guys see 4 letters, PTSD, and they think I'm damaged. They know nothing about it. Nobody's ever asked me about it. I said, I don't suffer from PTSD. I enjoy every fucking second of it. I earned my nightmares. I earned my nightmares, and they remind me that I did something worthwhile with my fucking life while I was here. And I said,
now, that's living with PTSD right there.
I want you to tell me when I can expect to stop being demanded that I apologize for being a combat Marine. And she heard that, and she said, "You don't owe anybody an apology at all." I said, "Well, the apostle," and I told him his, by name. I said, "Well, the apostle seems to think so." And she looked at her assistant, the captain, and she said, "I want to see him first thing in the morning," meaning the apostle. And I guess she ripped him. And the apostle, he doesn't think women belong anywhere but the kitchen. He's one of those guys. And so
oh wow,
oh boy,
for him to get his former college football playing, steroid jumping ass reamed by a 4'11" major in the state highway patrol with boobs, that wasn't, that was a fate worse than death. But
that was some good justice.
But from that point on, that stigma kind of followed me around until I retired, and I never cared. I mean, I like I said, you're not going to shame me for the decisions I made because, you didn't make them. You didn't have the balls to do what I did. Back when I was doing it, I was the idiot for doing it. Getting laughed at by the guys who had the good jobs and the money and the cars and the clothes, and now they can go to the 511 store and
401k.
Like I don't even wear that. T-shirts and jeans.
For what it's good for you. I know I liked you for a reason. But one thing that I suspect, based on the folks that I've worked with, and now what you're saying, it's kind of coming together. the shunning that goes on between the combat guys and the non-combat guys in the force is jealousy.
Right.
In plain English.
Yeah, I believe so, and a bit of insecurity on their part as well too. And one thing that I've kind of noticed as we've been doing, these podcasts, is it almost seems like in the police force, just like as well as in the military, they like to feed a lot of bullshit as far as, hey, we're here to take care of you. Your mental health is a priority. But as soon as you bring it up, then you're ostracized, you're shunned, you're made to feel less than, then the whispers start coming around. Then your job is on the line, your career is on the line, and it's like, well, shit, didn't just last week you tell me to let you know what's going on with me?
Oh, yeah.
Now it feels like I'm being punished for it. So guess what I'm not going to do next time? I'm definitely not going to tell you shit. So
yeah, we're here for you usually means we're here to scrutinize you if you reach out.
That's how it feels like.
Right. And the ones who are the worst and the loudest about it are the people who watched you in the war on CNN or on C-SPAN. They weren't even in combat. They've never heard a shot fired in anger. The only combat they've seen is what they paid $7.50 at the theater to go watch on with a bowl of popcorn. And
right.
But yeah, they do. They put on the air that, it, like you said, that we're here to help, but all they're there to do is if there's something even amiss, they're going to cut you so that you're not there and you're not going to cause them a lawsuit or. But the irony too, back in 2008, was the director of public safety. He was a Vietnam vet, Bronze Star recipient. And when I came back from Iraq, he made it a point to welcome me back. I had to go up to his office on the 5th floor of the headquarters building there, the Shipley office building, meet him, tell him about my time in Iraq and listen to, how he, how proud he was of being a member of the 101st Airborne in the Ashaw Valley in 1969 or wherever. And then 3 weeks later, his letterhead let me know that I'm on administrative leave pending the outcome of a psych eval. Like, well, gee, thanks, Sarge. I mean, buddy, fucking Blue Falcon coming in low and slow right there.
Let me just jump in here. Nate, you've told the story many times before. Hope you don't mind telling it now about the general and his opinions on suicide, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for anybody who hasn't heard it before. Yeah, happened to be the day that I finally realized I needed to reach out for some help of some type. And it took most of the morning just to get an appointment for my first intake. But when I finally went into the building, I was like, well, where's everybody at? They're like, oh, everybody, there's a mandatory suicide awareness, briefing class, whatever you want to call it, going on at the base theater at Quantico. So I go down there, and it hasn't started yet because it took them all morning to bus everybody there. And, there's some chairs up on the stage. There's going to be a couple guests up there. And one of the 5 or 7 generals on Quantico is there up in the front. And he gets up before the speakers are going to be introduced. And he's like, hey, let me just let everybody know right now that anybody who's thinking about suicide, that's a freaking coward's way out, or you're a freaking coward. I was standing at the back because I got there late, and my mouth dropped wide open. And I looked around me to see if anybody else caught that, what was going on. And I don't know, maybe they was just kind of deer in the headlights. They're like, maybe they were just frozen and weren't going to do anything about it. But I just couldn't believe it. I'm like, how do you expect anybody who's in here now, especially somebody in his command, to reach out or ask for help?
Exactly.
It's just, and that shuts people, and it's really sad to hear, that even if it was only the apostle and maybe he convinced the guy you called the sergeant, maybe he convinced him of something that wasn't there. But I would think that of all places, if you're going to have somebody that's hyper vigilant, is always on the alert, watches every single person, knows where the threats are, knows where the safety is, knows what their own, weakness is, will run towards gunfire to save anybody else, I would think law enforcement's the place for that. To me, that's like, hey, you're well suited for this.
Exactly.
Right. And most people would agree with that. But the reality is we are such a litigation happy society. And when you've got the things going on in the world now with police shootings and the racial tension that comes with that, being a cop during that period of time was interesting. And it's unfortunate that when those events occur, that's not just the cops who did it. That's every cop now. So it's almost to me, it ties in with if one soldier, Marine, sailor, airman, if one's got PTSD and he's a little, he's appears unstable, then they all do, and so we all tend to get lumped in that. But
I remember that something similar happening in the 90s.
Right.
Remember at the post office, right? I mean, it's been a long time since anybody said going postal, but that same thing was veterans in a post office, and they all got a bad rap.
As with any group, the motto holds true. When we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets.
That's right.
One shit wipes out 1,000 attaboys. But my big thing, going back to 2008 when they first came after me, I remember when I was put back to work, I remember telling somebody at that high level, if somebody would have pulled me aside and said, "Hey, we want to know what's going on," I would have explained it. And if they would have said, "Well, we still want to get you checked out," okay, I can take that. That's fine. But the investigative unit that I worked for, everything was just there was just an air of surreptitiousness to everything they did. You really,
yes,
always
subterfuge.
You really, like I said, everybody talked out of both sides of their faces there, and me, I can't help it. I wear my emotion, my feeling. You see it on my face. If I don't like you, you can probably tell 5 feet away because I'm gonna look at you and it's gonna come across. Because the day I retired, I had to go into the office for an hour, and it's something, administratively you have to show up on your last day for at least an hour before you go home or whatever. So I went in to do my hour, and I wanted to get the hell out of Dodge. I didn't want to talk to anybody. The people I like, I said goodbye to, I keep in touch with. The rest of them, I wouldn't cross the street to watch you cut your own throat, and they know who they are. And I would tell them, I'm trying to get out of there. And one of these mushheads who's got rank, he comes up to me, 20 years with the state. Congratulations, you made it. He goes, won't you, we got a few people here, a couple minutes. Won't you explain to us, what are you most proud of that you'll look back on with the most fondness about your life, here with the Department of Public Safety, with OIU? And I said, what I'm most proud of is that in 20 years, I never kissed another man's fucking ass. And I walked away from him. And you could have heard a mouse fart.
That was good because they were looking for something to make themselves look good.
Take care of each other. You know what? Fuck you. I like I said, I wouldn't piss on your teeth if your mouth was on fire. You son of a bitch.
Right.
Don't call me. I won't call you. Do I sound accurate? Yeah.
I was just going to say, he's like, Tony, I can't really tell what you were like as a Marine.
Well, as a corporal, my proficiency and conduct marks were, proficiency was always a 4.6, 4.6 average. Conduct was 4.2. So that was, and that's, I've got, when I told somebody I was a 4.6, 4.2 Marine, they just, wow. I didn't know that.
How does that happen? But
on a scale of 5.
That tells you, that shows you had some honest leaders too. That they had no problem justifying the 4.6.
For those of us who don't know what does 4.6 mean?
On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being total shit, 5 being angelic, water walker, you get ranked for proficiency in rank, proficiency in your MOS, and then conduct, how well you play with others. And my average as a Marine, my proficiency was always in the 4.6, 4.7 range. My conduct hovered around 4.1, 4.2. Well, it was 4.1 once, but 4.3, because I tended to speak my mind. I would, when I saw something, I spoke up. Sometimes I was right, sometimes I wasn't, but I was always willing to take it on the chin if I fucked up. I mean, I never threw anyone under the bus if it was me driving. I owned my mistakes because that's how I was taught. That's the NCOs that I came up with, and the mid-level leadership. That's what I learned from them. If you fucked it up, own it. If you cook it, you clean it, eat it. And so, unfortunately, we're a dying breed. Now it's past the buck. We're getting into that careerist mentality again.
Yeah. And Dr. Barry, 4.2, if I remember correctly, that was about as low as you could mark somebody where it didn't cause a lot of extra paperwork and oversight for the supervisor, for that.
Okay.
Whoever's grading
you had to justify it if it was low enough. And like if you got non-judicial punishment, then it was what, 3 9s, 3.8, 3.9?
Yeah. And that was usually self-explanatory, right? But if it was somebody's conduct was to the point where they weren't rating an NJP yet, then they've got to write all kinds of stuff. They got to have a corrective action plan.
The only time I actually had to witness an NJP of an enlisted Marine was a guy in my platoon that he was passing bad checks, and we're in his office, charges are read, and the officer, the captain asks, how can you explain this? And when this Lance Corporal with a straight face said, well, I don't understand how I didn't have any money, there were still checks in the book, I fell out. I broke rank. I looked at the guy like, did that just come out of his mouth? How am I out of money? I've still got checks.
Yep.
That was
the early 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. So I remember, so when we came back from Somalia, they put me on a break, and I went to become the battalion legal clerk. And it seemed like that was 90% of what we did was bad checks. But, a lot of the times, it wasn't the Marine that was writing the bad checks. It was that brand new 18, 19-year-old spouse that had the checkbook when they were deployed, when they were in the field. And, of course, the battalion commander was like, well, you're the one that makes the money. Yeah. Why aren't you managing your own money?
Yeah.
We ruined a lot of Marines with a lot of potential during that time frame over bad checks.
Yes. But his explanation, I mean, I don't know how the guy kept a straight face looking at him. I couldn't, and I got reamed for lack of bearing in the middle of an NJP hearing. I'm like, what do you want from me? The guy's he's a stand-up comedian, for Christ's sake. I mean, his delivery was dead on.
Yeah, I'd always heard that repeated, but I just thought it was something people said. But since you guys were up at Camp Horno, right? Is that where you were at, or Mateo?
62 area.
San Mateo, yeah. So you were on Pendleton, so we were probably getting it word of mouth through the staff NCOs. And that was about the time they started forcing everybody to take personal finance.
Well, if you, if Nate, you were with 3-9 in Somalia, so did you hear about the guy in the 15th MU that stole the Lotus convertible in Jebel Ali at the International Seamen's Club? Okay.
What?
No. I never heard of that.
This was funny. I was party to this. I was an eyewitness to this. This did happen. It's no shit. It's not a sea story. But 15th MU, when we left Somalia, we went to Jebel Ali, and we were at the shipyard there for 3 weeks for a mini refit. And so our libo was essentially on the pier there during Ramadan. And so over in Jebel Ali and Abu Dhabi, you had the USO that sponsored a hotel over there, and the bar, the Sheriff's Club or the Sheriff's Club. And it was a big USO lounge area with an outdoor pool and bar, beer and whatnot. And across the parking lot was a hotel. Yeah. And so we're at the Sheriff's Club drinking beer, getting shit-faced. And I go back to the hotel. We were staying at the hotel, and I'm going to call my wife. I know it's like an 11-hour difference between the Middle East and the East Coast. And so I'm on the phone with her, and as I'm hanging up, I hear a commotion in the hallway, and it's the guys I'm rooming with, we're sharing this room with, and they're fighting with a couple of these Arabs. Well, unbeknownst to us, me, one of the guys that was staying in my room that night, another corporal, he saw a car, a Lotus Turbo Esprit convertible, idling in the parking lot, and in his inebriated state, he hopped in the car to take it for a joyride. He did 3 or 4 laps around the building, ratcheting it through the gears. And the guy who owned the car came out to find his car missing, goes back in to call the local cops, the constables, because there's a theft in an Arab country. There's a theft in the UAE.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was old school UAE.
When Gerhardt, when he comes back, he parks the car. The Arabs are waiting on him. They try to jump him. He starts whooping on them. His buddies come out and pile onto the fight, and they're everybody's duking it out except me. I'm in my room on the phone with my wife, and so the next morning, Shore Patrol is at our door to take us back to the Tripoli, and I'm like, there were 5 of us checked into the room. Who are we missing? Well, it's Gerhardt. Where is he? We don't know. We get back to the Tripoli, and we get to the company office, and the company first sergeant locks us at attention. I mean, we're all still drunk and hungover in civilian clothes. And he starts reading us our rights under Article 32 as witnesses. And then he puts us, you're on restriction till, go to your berthing area, get cleaned up. I'll yell for you if I need you. So we find out that this car went for a ride. And so the State Department gets involved. They negotiate the release of this corporal. They bring him back to the ship, and he's on restriction. And then it's
didn't
going
miss
right
movement
to
though.
General court martial because it wasn't petty theft. It was theft of an object more than $50,000.
No. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, it's the car that Richard Gere couldn't drive in Pretty Woman.
Gerhardt, he gets reduced from corporal to private, and they're going to send him back to Pendleton to be out processed, dishonorable or other honorable or whatever. Well, that's what they told the UAE, told them, the sultans over there, that's how they were handling it. In the meantime, they fly him to Guam, and as we leave Jebel Ali, we go to Phuket, Thailand, and as we're going past Guam on our way to Hawaii, they fly him back out to the ship. He's still a private, but he's on restriction in the boat, and he was a good corporal. He was a good guy. He just had a blackout drunk episode one night, and I remember seeing him in his rack, and he just looked just down. You could just tell it was eating at him. And I walked over to him and I said, dude, I got to tell you, bro, I envy you. I do. I said, 30, 40 years from now, nobody's going to remember this float. They're not going to remember we went to Somalia. They're not going to remember shit. But everybody's going to remember the drunk motherfucker who stole the car and drove it. And we're going to be talking about it. And he kind of laughed and I got his spirits up. But when we got back to San Mateo after the float, he and I were in the PX there at San Mateo, and some NCO was giving him shit because he hadn't gotten reinstated. His court martial was on appeal. He ended up getting reinstated to corporal and getting out. They saved him, but he's standing there, and this sergeant from 2-5 or whomever is giving him shit, just barking at him. Hey, private, and your hair's awful long, private, blah blah blah. And I walked over and I said, hey, sergeant, you know who this guy is? He goes, I don't care who he is. I said, no, this is former Corporal Ken Gerhardt from Echo 29. He's the dude that drove the Lotus around the Sheriff's Club in Jebel Ali. And this sergeant goes, that was you? Oh, bro. And heard about it. That's the Marines. It was already said.
I love it.
So I was vindicated. The sergeant's like, hey, devil, I'm sorry, man. I didn't know. I had no clue. But, oh, yeah.
And now it's on the internet forever.
Right?
If anybody out there from Echo 29, 15th MU on that Westpac, you all remember Corporal Kenneth Gerhardt took the Lotus for the joyride. And I'm hoping that his platoon commander, Colonel Manning, who commanded 1-2 and then 2nd Marine Regiment, Mike Manning, I'm hoping he's listening because he's like, yeah, I was First Lieutenant Manning and I had to go stand. I didn't know what happened and I'm getting my ass chewed because one of my Marines stole the car. And he says, I'm not even sure if I was the right man. There might have been somebody else. But that's the Marine Corps I miss. I mean, and
that's freaking awesome.
All the bad times, all the nightmare moments, all the the moments of terror, the saddest. you don't remember those, but you remember, you focus on those moments when you see a Marine almost get court-martialed for theft, but it's a story we're telling, and that's the Marine Corps I remember.
Right.
Yeah, we've talked about that with a few other guests too before, about how there's just things that outside of the military are just unbelievable, and some of them haven't even been depicted in movies.
Right, right.
Really? So watch what's going to happen now. Maybe some people that Doc Berry and I met this past weekend are going to stick this in a movie, and you're going to see it.
And if they if they do, they're going to call it the lotus position.
Well, I was going to say who I would think it was until you said that, so I'll leave her alone. Man. Oh, gosh. And I was thinking about something, because it's, believe it or not, there's something happened. So I still work for the Department of the Navy. And there was something that came out today about suicide awareness. It just hit me the wrong way. Because it's another one of these efforts where I believe the people that are being told to write the material, their hearts are in the right place. They're doing the best they can with what they're told to do. But it's another one of these obvious, it's that month again.
September,
we have to look like we're doing something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was actually, it said creating hope by something. And I was like, fuck, hope doesn't stop suicide.
Action does.
And I was like, really? We're going to focus on this extra for 1 month, and that's going to be the effort? And I was pretty pissed off about it. I was wound up for a couple hours today, and wrote a letter using official email to a couple people that might be able to do something. But I was like, we don't need more of this bullshit where we just look like we're doing something on the front end. We need to start measuring what the effect is and if it's effective.
I've experienced. I mean, we've all probably experienced. We have personal experience with a suicide, someone close to us, somebody we knew. But I want to plug him because I know a guy who he tried to commit suicide. He was unsuccessful, and in the year that he tried to take his own life, which is the lowest of human existence, if you're at the lowest point in your life, you're going to end it. He ended up summiting a mountain, the highest point in an area where he was living at the time. His name's Mike Fairman, and he was a corpsman, Doc Fairman, and he created Summit for Soldiers, an outreach where he goes after soldiers, sailors, servicemen with PTSD, and he goes out on these event therapy type things where he goes mountaineering, hill climbing, whatever, and he has a vinyl embossed flag with his Summit for Soldiers logo and emblem, and he puts the names of local soldiers, servicemen who've taken their own lives successfully. They've ended their lives. And then he summits the highest point in those individual states with that flag, takes the picture of it, gives it to their loved ones, their families, to represent them. He summited Mount Everest.
Oh, wow.
He climbed the highest point in the world with that flag and took his picture. And it was on the cover of American Legion magazine. They later sponsored Summit for Soldiers. The organization gave him office space, gave him funding, and he's still doing that kind of outreach. Wow. And like I said, he was a Greenside corpsman and did his time in Iraq, Afghanistan. There's that. I mean, I got into sled hockey. As far as outreach went, which sled hockey, it's an adaptive sport for amputees, but it's also a growing sport with the disabled veteran community. And I played for a sled hockey team here in Ohio, the Ohio Warriors. And if you're a disabled veteran with any disability rating of 10% and above from the VA, you're eligible to play on this team. And I got into it because, my wife wanted me to get back into the, outreach with like-minded people. I needed to be around others like me. And what other way to be around grunt types than in a bucket on the ice, doing body blows and checks into the boards, hitting a puck and talking shit. And you've got, we had guys on the team that were amputees. One was a double amp above the knee. He was a combat engineer, tripped an IED. And on the ice, the guy could skate like the wind. I mean, he was fast. He could handle the puck. And I remember I remember bitching in practice one time. I was slow. I'm like, man, I got to get faster. And without missing a beat, he skates by me and he goes, well, you can always do what I did, and points and then skates off. But,
Wow.
That's really funny to think about, because in those moments, right, you're the one at the handicap because you still have your legs and you're aware that you can't use
these
them.
guys, and it's an equalizer. And a lot of time, but there's not enough veterans only teams, warrior teams they call them, out there. So we had to play with other developmental teams, and so you'd have a team of kids, teenagers, and adolescents with developmental disabilities, spina bifida, paraplegics, and so on. And there's nothing more humbling than getting your ass kicked by a kid in a walker on the ice.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to be humbled,
Right.
play sled hockey.
Yeah.
And why don't we? I just got on the chat from Luis. We got to wind things up. We've been at this for over 2 hours, and it's been a blast and a half. And he's got a 3-year-old to feed, and I got to go make sure my pillow doesn't move for at least 20 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to be a complete bitch tomorrow. But thanks for being with us, Tony. You've been phenomenal.
I really
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, this has been
inviting me and bringing me out. It was a good time. I enjoyed it.
It's great having you on. And, you know, there were 5 people in the audience in addition to us on here that were on the entire time. I mean, I know that's not a big number, but considering that I didn't put it out there really again until less than 24 hours, and people showed up, and I'm glad that they're here to hear you tell your story, and it we'll be able to post you up, and everybody will get to hear your story for a long time to come.
Amen to that.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. And if you ever want to come back on again, definitely you know where to sign up.
Yep.
For what it's worth, hey Tony, before you shut down. Nate, what's the proper terminology? Don't close your browser because the upload is continuing. Nate, you take care of that conversation.
Yeah. So I think I talked about that in the email, right? Okay. Yeah, so he's aware.
Right. Just want to make sure it was out there.
Yep, we're good to go.
Well, Tony, it was
gents.
definitely a pleasure getting to know you, getting to hear your story. Your time in Desert Storm, and then in Somalia, and then being recalled on active duty to go fight in Iraq as well. Definitely appreciate all the years that you committed to this country, to the citizens, as well as, to your local citizens within your Ohio County area that you work in the police force. So thank you so much for coming on board and sharing your story with us. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Doc. I appreciate that.
Raw, man.
All right, gentlemen. Well, y'all have a great evening. Till next time.
So it's not good. It's not goodbye. It's until we meet again.
That's right.
I was just going to say, don't be a stranger. You still hit us up on Facebook.
There you go.
All right.
All right, man.
Bye, everyone.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.